Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
And with us today is Hysteria co-host and best friend of the pod, Alyssa Mastromonaco.
Hi, bros.
Thanks for doing this, Alyssa.
I wish everyone could see how I make you guys laugh when I say, hi, bros.
Guess what? They can, because it's on video.
As you've said for over a decade, basically.
I know, forever.
All right, let's get to the news. I would say that COVID is back, but it actually never left. It's still the first wave, and on Tuesday, the U.S. recorded more than 35,000 new cases, the highest one-day total since April 25th. This hasn't just been a surge in cases, but hospitalizations in states like Arizona, Florida, here in California, and especially Texas, where some hospitals in Houston are almost at capacity. Governor Greg Abbott, who started reopening the state as early as April 29th and signed an executive order just on June 3rd that forbids cities from enforcing requirements that people wear masks, is now urging Texans to stay home and wear masks. And he also announced this morning that they are pausing reopening, though I don't know what that means since they're pretty damn open already. Alyssa, what's your reaction to this as someone who's been through the horrific wave that hit New York?
I mean, of course this is happening. Like, all the medical experts have said this was going to happen if people didn't wear their freaking masks and socially distance. And so people are, in Texas, I think they've been going back to the gym for like over a month. Why? People are using cans and rubber bands at home. Like, just do that for a little while longer. But yeah, I mean, here in New York, it's still on the downward trajectory, but it's vigilant as hell here. I mean, when you walk around, it's like, people forget, especially in like the more rural communities, that this is when people are harvesting their crops. And if you go to a store or anything, it is going to all of our stores around here. If one person gets sick in a store, the store has to close for 2 weeks. That's the rule here in New York. So it's like nobody wants things to close back down again. We were closed down longer than anybody and had the biggest economic hit. And so I think everyone here, for the most part, except those assholes in New York City that they keep showing, is very much like, we're all in this together. And if we don't keep our masks on and stay distant, it's gonna go tits up again.
Dan... That's right, Alyssa.
It's important. Tits up is an official WHO term for virus spread.
It is. It's a military term for, when the plane goes tits up.
It's anything that's R+1 in an infection rate is tits up.
That's the chart. Dan, you and I have been under a shelter-in-place order since late March in a state that requires everyone to wear masks. So what's going on here? I mean, do Trump and Republican politicians deserve all the blame for what's going on?
All of the blame? No. Most of the blame, yes. Look, this is a huge challenge under the best circumstances with the best leadership. And we're seeing that in California, where even as you begin to open up a little bit, you continue to see virus spread. As the percentage of people who are going back to work goes up, you're going to see virus spread. And so, it is not as simple as blue state's good, red state's bad, as we're living here in California. But the one thing that unites all of the states is that we are being led by an incredibly stupid person right now in the White House. And it's funny, and we sort of laugh about it, but it's a gigantic fucking problem. The President of the United States does not want to solve the problem. He wants to pretend like it does not exist. He models the wrong behavior. He creates political incentives for people like Governor Greg Abbott to stop mayors from making their citizens wear masks, to make them open up faster. And that is a huge consequence. I saw this video that Gavin Newsom tweeted out that was I think it's a PSA that has every living California governor, from Gray Davis to Jerry Brown to Arnold Schwarzenegger to Pete Wilson, Republicans and Democrats, encouraging people to wear masks. In an alternative universe where our president was someone who could think about something more than themselves for 2 fucking seconds, you could see a world where the president wore a mask. The president got Obama, Bush, Carter, Clinton into the White House, and they all put masks on to model good behavior, because this is really hard. But there's one thing that we know helps, and that's for people to put a piece of fucking cloth on their face. And the president, instead of encouraging people to do that, decided to make it some sort of weird cultural issue and has made the problem worse in this country. He is not solely responsible for what's happening, but he's a huge part of why there isn't enough testing, there isn't enough mask wearing, and a lot of this lies on him. And he should not, just because something is happening in California, that it may also be happening in Texas, does not mean that this is not largely about a massive failure at the federal government.
I mean, public health is just as much about education and communication as it is about policies, right? Like, as you're saying, like, people need information and examples from leaders at the highest level of government. Like, Eric Garcetti can go to the microphone every day and tell us all to wear masks, and for that matter, so can Gavin Newsom. They simply don't have the megaphone that the president of the United States has, you know? And like, you know, LA County is 10 million people. We're the biggest, most populous county in America. Like, to reach everyone in California, like, you walk around and a lot of people are wearing masks, but like, in a lot of the fucking suburban counties in California, they didn't have mask requirements. They just decided not to. They decided to open bars and restaurants, you know, which I also, by the way, just don't understand the message of, we've had the message, stay home. Everyone stay home unless you need to go out, but we're opening bars and restaurants. Well, like, who the fuck's going to the bars and restaurants then if we're all supposed to be staying home? Why did you open them? Right? Like, I understand, like, outdoor restaurants. I understand outdoor activities. I even understand, like, retail. People can, like, run in and run out because you're not in there for a long time. Like, I sort of get all that with enough precautions and with mask wearing. But part of the problem we're seeing here is, like, a lot of these bar and restaurant owners and a lot of other businesses are having such a hard time in this economy, and they can't even count on Congress or Washington to do any. Like, you could pay all the employees of restaurants and bars to stay home for as long as we need to make sure that we don't do this. They don't want to do that, right? Like, Congress is broken. We have no leadership from Donald Trump. He's decided to polarize the most important thing, which is wearing a mask, and made that a fucking partisan issue too, just like everything else. And people take cultural cues from the president of the United States.
I mean, just here's how you know that the entire mask thing is just incredibly selfish bullshit, which is Donald Trump is doing a town hall with Sean Hannity, and Sean Hannity's been one of the people out there yelling about masks and how it's an impingement of your freedom and all of this other bullshit. And at that town hall, people are going to be required to wear masks.
I don't know, Alyssa. It's bad.
We know how bad this can be. Right? So, like, why do we want to go back there? It's like the most selfish thing that people can do, even if the president is modeling horrible behavior. It's still like when you see people, and I don't know how it is where you guys live, but when you do see someone here who's not wearing their mask, they're just like they're not just not wearing a mask. It's like this fuck you. They're walking around. They're like, fuck you. I don't have my mask on. And I was like, I have mine on, but you're the endangered person. So, like, you're like the old person who is at risk. I'm going to be fine. But it is such a statement, right? When people don't have it on, because I don't know. I find it incredible and very upsetting. And here too, I don't know how it is by you guys, but restaurants, we're in phase 3. Most of the states in phase 3 or phase 4 now. And restaurants have opened, but no one is doing indoor dining. Instead, New York has taken a lot of pages out of Paris and how Paris reopened safely. And they've blocked a lot of streets so that the restaurants can set up outside and be socially distanced and not like endanger people, so that people can start like getting out and about, but not be totally at risk. Though we still have not gone to eat anywhere because why? We've done the same thing in LA as we opened. For a while, we just did outdoor eating, which is perfect for LA. I don't know why we just didn't stop there. Why do we needed to continue going inside, to bars, because that crowded settings are a problem. For Trump, it's not just about the mask, it's also about the testing. We talked about this on Monday's pod, but after the White House said that the president was joking when he said that he told his people to slow down the COVID testing, Trump told reporters, quote, "I don't kid. Let me just tell you. Let me make it clear."
And that's exactly what he did when the federal government announced on Wednesday that they are ending support for 13 drive-through coronavirus testing locations nationwide, including 7 in Texas, the Texas that we just talked about. The Trump administration is also sitting on $14 billion of unused funding for coronavirus testing and contact tracing. So Democrats, Biden campaign, a couple super PACs are jumping all over Trump's testing comments with statements, ads that are airing in swing states. How big of a deal would you guys treat this if you were on a campaign?
I think people are treating it appropriately. There was without a doubt that Trump's response to the coronavirus is one of the reasons why his poll numbers are down, as we'll talk about later. And this is a very easily understood example. And it speaks not to just his failure to do enough testing. He admitted his actual reason for doing it was because it makes him look bad. So it is it fits right into the narrative we talk about all the time, which is Trump first, America last. He is putting himself over what is best for the country. And so this is a way to drive that narrative in a way that is directly connected with what is happening in the country right now. And I also think it's notable that this is one of the first times, I think really in the last few months, where Democrats have been able to drive a narrative on Trump through their actions. You know, they took a moment out of this and they are driving it in the free press and in the paid media. And it has Trump tends to put himself on his heels with his own stupidity. But here he said something Democrats latched onto, and they drove that story for more than the 17 seconds that the normal Trump gaffe gets treated by the press.
You guys know how I hate to politicize like national health crises and disasters and stuff like that. But this is literally like he is demonstrating how unfit he is, because the one thing that I have not heard broken down by anyone really when he talks about this is that the testing is not driving up the numbers. Sick people are driving up the numbers. And the thing that I think is very interesting, and I would like someone to do some research on, is like the number of tests and how many sick people it's yielding. Because I think the problem is that the tests, if the tests were being given and everyone was coming out negative, they'd be praising the testing and being like, look how great we're doing. So the thing is that clearly people are sick. Clearly there are hotspots that could be contained if people were tested. And so it's only June, right? The chickens are all going to come home to roost before September, October, November. And you're going to have places like Texas and Florida where, you know, a city like Houston, I think Texas Medical Center, which is like the largest medical facility in the world, is already at 97% capacity. Well, you could stop so much of this if you just put some protections and restrictions and pauses back in place. So I don't know, it actually, his strategy doesn't make any sense.
It makes no sense. I mean, like, look, you're right. When you test more, you find more cases because there's just more cases of coronavirus out there than we know. We've known that for a long time, since the beginning of the pandemic. And in places where cases are rising right now, like Arizona, like Texas, it's still hard for a lot of people to get a test if they want to get a test. So what happens when you don't get a test if you want to get a test? You don't know if you're sick. You could spread it to more people. It's also the quality of testing too, right? Like the White House has fucking those rapid tests, right? That can tell you right away, or there's tests that can tell you overnight, right? Like if we had deployed sort of that same rapid testing all across America, imagine what we could be doing if you could like take a test and in 5 minutes know if you have coronavirus or not. People could start going back to work. People could start going out. The economy could reopen more. The fact that that infrastructure is not in place, nor did Trump even ever try to put it in place across the country, is one of the big reasons we're in this fucking mess right now.
Imagine if there were antibody tests that worked.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, that too.
But it's also not rocket science to figure out whether the number of cases going up is because of testing. It's algebra. Just divide. Let's figure out the rate. There is a rate. We look at it every single day, and it is going up. And so, like, the entire conversation around this, it's insane. Like, if you were just to, try to explain to someone from another planet that in the middle of one of the most challenging periods in American history, that the president would just basically put on the mission accomplished banner and be done with it without ever actually trying to fix it in his election year while he was down in the polls. It just like, it makes so little sense. It's hard to fathom just what a incredibly stupid period we're living in.
I mean, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we can imagine what those people would say, because the European Union is also saying it, which is like, hey, America, you suck. Stay in America. You're not welcome here.
We're banned. We're banned from the European Union now.
As someone said, we've become what Trump would refer to as a shithole country.
I mean, no, Trump has looked at the polls that say that people don't approve of how he's handling the pandemic, and he's like, I know. I just won't handle the pandemic. I'll just pretend it's not there. That's how I'll fix that poll number. I'm just gonna pretend it's not around. That's how he's running right now. All right, let's talk about the mini wave of progressive Democrats who did really well in Tuesday's New York and Kentucky primaries. Because of all the mail-in ballots, some of these races haven't been officially called, but here's what we know so far. In the New York 16th, former middle school principal Jamal Bowman has declared victory over 30-year Congressman Eliot Engel, who had endorsements from Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Hillary Clinton. In the New York 12th, progressive challenger Suraj Patel is running neck and neck with longtime incumbent Carolyn Maloney. In the New York 15th, Richie Torres has upset the very Trumpy, homophobic Ruben Diaz Sr. And in the New York 17th, progressive activist and Obama Justice Department official Mondaire Jones is the apparent winner of a crowded primary to replace retiring Congresswoman Nita Lowey. If elected, Torres and Jones will become the first openly gay black members of Congress. And one last race we're watching in Kentucky that is too close to call, the Senate primary between Amy McGrath, who had a massive financial advantage, and Charles Booker, who closed the gap in the final weeks with a surge of grassroots support. As of recording this pod, it looks like Charles Booker has taken a small lead as they start counting all the votes in Louisville, but we are still waiting on that one. Alyssa, you have grown up in New York politics. You know a lot of these incumbents that went down. You've been around them for a while. How big of a deal are some of these underdog progressive victories?
Well, it is a big deal, but it is also such a symbol of complacency on the part of the incumbents, because if there's one thing that you could take away from AOC beating Joe Crowley last time around, it's that the fucking hustle matters, right? The hustle matters. Being in the district, knowing what's going on, it all matters. And, I don't think that Engel would have maybe faced such a fight if he had come back to New York during the pandemic. New York was ground zero. And, I've heard him talk about it, that, their house in DC or Maryland, wherever it is bigger and it was easier for them to quarantine. Well, okay, I guess. But where were you before that? And so I think that the one thing you see about all these folks, chairs of two big committees in the House are now in a lot of fucking trouble. And, it's just, I think it was hubris to not, on all of their parts, to not understand that AOC nationally, but specifically in New York, in abutting counties, was not a blip. It was, people want to see their elected officials actually working for them. And, I got called by every single one of those people who is in the lead now, basically. And I never heard from, just the campaigns. I didn't even get a text message from any of the other campaigns. So, the hustle's real.
Dan, Jamel Bowie had an interesting tweet about this. He said, one way you can think of the intra-democratic divide is that it isn't ideological but generational, and not generational in an old versus young, but when did you form your ideas and impressions about partisan politics? He goes on to cite how Elizabeth Warren, who's 71, only came into politics, national politics, over the last decade, which is one reason her style is closer to AOC than it is to Chuck Schumer. What did you think of that?
I agree with that. Jamel, as you would expect, made a similar point to one I've made in the past, but he made it more succinctly and more eloquently. I've often described that the biggest fight in the Democratic Party is not ideological. It's about democracy and those who think that once Trump is gone, things will go back to normal, or ones who understand that we have a much broader challenge before us, which I think is how you fall on that line, however you describe it, is based on when you came of age in politics. What were your defining political experiences? And if it happened in response to the Reagan Revolution and the DLC theory of politics in the 90s, or they happened after Obama was elected, when you saw how the Republican Party became even further radicalized and went to extreme measures to defeat not just Barack Obama, but the political power of the Obama coalition, I think it says a lot. So I think that is the right sort of way to think about that divide. And I think, you can see it not just in the policies that these people before, but like Mondaire Jones, for instance, ran on Supreme Court expansion. He has the support of Supreme Court expansion. And that is someone who understands that obstacles to progressive power and policy are going to continue even when Trump is gone because of the way in which the Republicans have rigged the Supreme Court. And so I think this is, Alyssa's right. The AOC primary was not just a specific one example of Joe Crowley being out of touch with his district and she being a transcendent candidate. It's about a much bigger shift that's coming in the Democratic Party as the new generation takes forward. The sort of the Obama generation takes over, and the post-Obama generation, in fact, takes over for the remnants of what came before.
I also think that what you see in common with a lot of these races, from AOC to Jamal Bowman, is sort of the power of multiracial populism to stitch together a coalition of working class white and brown and black folks, especially in districts that are majority non-white, which many of these are. And, Democratic politicians have probably used that message for a while, but what's making this different now is that the candidate themselves giving a message of multiracial populism is not white, is largely black in these cases. But I do think that speaks to the future of what we can expect from the Democratic Party. And which brings me to sort of the big question here. Like, how does the Democratic Party nominate diverse progressive leaders like AOC and Jamal Bowman and Richie Torres, and then also nominate Joe Biden, who fairly easily defeated the most diverse progressive field of candidates we've ever had? What do you think? Anyone want to take? Who wants to take that?
Seems like a real nut to crack, huh? I mean, but I also think that this is sort of, again, that politics being local, right? That people want someone who can set the country back on path, which is Joe Biden, that they know is going to just fix it from what it is now. And I think that these progressive sort of victories are very much candidates reflecting what their districts actually want and how things are changing. Like Engel's district is majority minority. And so now by Bowman actually, representing them potentially, they finally have a representative who reflects who they are. So I think it's a difference between local people, what they want here and what they want in Washington. And I feel like they trust Joe Biden very much to fix what's broken-ish in DC.
Dan, what do you think?
I think in some ways what's happening in New York is a preview of Democratic politics in 2022, 2024, and beyond. And when the Democratic presidential race was in many ways frozen in amber from 2016, where the lessons of that election drove everything. Narratives about electability, which, as we talk about all the time, are steeped in racism and misogyny, drove that election. And it very well may be, and the polls certainly indicate it now, that Biden is incredibly electable. But it was just a different occasion. I think had this been an open primary where you were not picking the person who is going to take on Donald Trump and particularly save us from actually what we're living through right fucking now, you would have a different approach, or a different, maybe and possibly a different result. But also part of it is that Biden may have been the establishment older white guy, but he won almost entirely on the backs of tremendous support from the African-American community. And so he's like, if you were a Democrat, who's potentially looking at a primary down the line, the Biden formula potentially works for you, which is you can't lose touch with the base of your party. And Biden, by whatever means he did it, and a lot of us were very skeptical of it throughout the entire primary, but he succeeded in maintaining rock solid and enthusiastic support from the most consistent voting bloc in the Democratic Party.
I I agree. I think one of the big reasons the Democratic Party took a chance on a black man named Barack Hussein Obama, who was just a couple of years out of the Illinois state legislature in 2008, is because George W. Bush wasn't on the ballot anymore, as much as everyone didn't like George W. Bush. It was, like you said, it was an open primary. And so the fear of another Bush term wasn't there. In 2020, Donald Trump and the fear of a second Trump turn has driven almost everything about this election, including ultimately what happened in the Democratic primary. And so what you had is a lot of people, a lot of Democratic voters at the end of the day really liked Bernie Sanders, really liked Elizabeth Warren, really liked Kamala Harris, really liked we had a lot of very well-liked candidates. The problem was not like favorability. It's for reasons, as you pointed out, Dan, reasons of sort of like institutional sexism, racism. Like people started voting because they were worried what other white voters in the Midwest might think. And they thought that Joe Biden might be the more electable candidate, including a lot of black voters in South Carolina and other states. That is a dynamic that exists, I think, uniquely in 2020, that in 2022 and 2024 may not be there anymore if Trump is gone. And if Trump is gone, and we go to 2024, I actually do think Democrats are much more likely, the Democratic electorate, to take a chance on a more progressive candidate, and a candidate of color, a woman of color. Like I think what we saw in New York, like you said, will be the Democratic Party nationally going forward.
I think I agree with all of that. I do think we should not short shrift Joe Biden in one respect, which is these candidates won, as you said, by putting together a multi-generational, multiracial working class coalition. And I know it upends every fucking Twitter narrative, but that's what Joe Biden did to win.
He calls himself the bridge, right? He's said this many times. He sees himself as the bridge. And it's tough to be, it's tough to do what Joe Biden did, right? Yeah. Like the fact that he was able to win over every piece of the Democratic coalition, which now spans from young progressives in cities to like old white people in Wisconsin. It's a big fucking coalition right now, and we need it to be a big coalition in order to win an electoral college majority, unfortunately. And to be able to win that sort of that breadth is very tricky, I think. So you're right. Joe Biden gets a lot of credit for that.
I laugh every time they talk about him being the bridge and when he talks about being the bridge, because the bridge on Sirius XM, the channel, is literally Joe Biden. It has got something for everyone.
That's so funny. I've listened to that. It is.
I know. You can really just welcome it into your home.
Just The Bridge, the FX TV show a few years ago, is not Joe Biden.
So we're now used to seeing in pretty blue districts, House districts, primary challengers knocking off an incumbent who are sort of younger and more progressive. We haven't seen it as much in play out, we just talked about nationally, but even in Senate races. We may be seeing it in Kentucky right now, where Charles Booker may beat Amy McGrath, who's not an incumbent, but is much more moderate than he is. Question, I guess, as we look to 2022, senators, incumbent Democratic senators who are up in blue states that are going to be safely blue no matter what happens to them? Should Chuck Schumer be worried in 2022?
They better find their fucking hustle is what they better do. You better get your butt back upstate.
What do you think, Dan?
Chuck Schumer is clearly already worried because when they asked him about whether he was supporting Eliot Engel, his congressional colleague for like 3 decades was like, Who? Engel? Is it Engel? Eli? No, don't know. No, haven't heard.
Not familiar.
So a few things I'd say, though, is that running statewide in New York is different than running in a district in the Bronx and Queens, right? It just is. Chuck Schumer has has never been known as someone who lacks hustle. I mean, he is someone who dedicated 2 years of his life in order to try to win every single county in New York for no reason. You don't get extra senatorial powers if you do that. I think it did. Alyssa, correct me if I'm wrong here, but didn't Chuck Schumer score a perfect score on the SAT twice?
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah, I think he went back and took it again just to prove he could. So I think he's going to hustle. He should be, you're going to see a lot of pressure on him. He's going to be the Democratic leader with, if the Democrats take the Senate and the White House, he's going to be the Democratic leader pushing through legislation that is going to be potentially more moderate than a challenger would like. He's going to be under tremendous pressure from many people, including us, about the filibuster in that situation. And I guess I would say this. There will be a lot of challenges for Schumer, but he's not going to be caught off guard by this in ways that perhaps Engel and Joe Crowley were.
But this is why primaries are good, and the threat of a primary can be good, even if Chuck Schumer hangs on, right? If Chuck Schumer hangs on, then it's because Chuck Schumer did a good job for the people of New York, and they believe that he's progressive enough and fighting hard enough for them to return him to office. And that probably means that when all of us and a bunch of progressives are pushing him on things like the filibuster, he's going to think, yeah, maybe I will get rid of the filibuster because I don't want my ass beaten by AOC in a primary. Like Chris Coons from Delaware. No one's confusing Chris Coons as some progressive, right? And the other day he's talking about if Joe Biden wins the presidency, we're not going to let Mitch McConnell block our agenda. Maybe we will get rid of the filibuster. One of the last people I would expect to have said that. I was like, I was very excited.
Do you think he's heard the whisper campaign I've started about my potential Senate primary race in Delaware in 2022?
I hope so.
You know I'm going to run that race.
But I do, look, I mean, I know the DCCC has been all worried about this. They blacklist consultants who work on primary challenger campaigns. I think that primary challenges are healthy in the Democratic Party, right? It's not because I want every single challenger to win, but the incumbents should be pressured, right? They should feel the heat, and they should earn, like you said, Alyssa, they should hustle. They should have to earn every fucking vote.
That blacklisting of the consultants was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen.
So dumb. So dumb.
So dumb.
All right, so before we move on, I do want to talk about one Republican primary result. In the race to fill the seat of former North Carolina Congressman Mark Meadows, who is now the White House Chief of Staff, 24-year-old Madison Cawthorn beat Meadows' hand-picked replacement, Linda Bennett, who was also endorsed by none other than Donald Trump himself. Dan, Cawthorn's win marks the third time that a Republican endorsed by Trump lost this cycle. Is the spell broken? What's going on here?
Yes, and that's a story I'm sticking to. I mean, it is important to note that a lot of Donald Trump's ability to get the Republicans in Congress to cover up his crimes is based on their very real fears that if he endorses their opponent in a primary, they will lose, right? That's how we ended up, frankly, with some of the people fucking up coronavirus. That's how we ended up with Brian Kemp and Ron DeSantis in Florida and Georgia. And if that fear erodes, you potentially could see Republicans having a teeny tiny more willingness to speak out and try to save themselves in the short term. I don't really know what happened in this exact race. It seems like the guy who won was a much better candidate than the person who lost. Mark Meadows is generally a doofus, so it's not surprising to me that he picked the wrong person to back. But if the mythology of Trump's hold over the party begins to erode in the minds of the only audience in which it matters, which is Republicans on the Hill, then that's a problem for him. So I think we should drive the fuck out of this neighborhood.
Alyssa, do you think a bunch of Republicans are going to start fleeing from Donald Trump and not wanting to appear with him on stage?
No. Of course not. Well, also, let's be clear. Will this be the first member of Congress named Madison? This kid is still very Trumpy. It's not like he's some progressive Republican. So I think that, they will distance themselves maybe from him, they won't use his name, but they're still doubling down on all the bullshit he believes.
Yeah, and it's a little late to run away from the Trumpian embrace in June of 2020. All right, let's talk about the polls. There's a lot of them out there right now. Just about all of them show Joe Biden opening up a commanding lead over Donald Trump. We are not talking about this to get you excited, to make you complacent, or to predict in any way what might happen in November. That is our disclaimer. I'm just going to keep repeating it from now until November. We are talking about this to analyze where the race is right now and how that might affect each campaign strategy. We're going to use one of the highest quality polls in the country from the New York Times and Siena College. They were one of the only pollsters that had Trump leading in some battleground states right before 2016. They were closer to the 2018 midterm results than almost anyone else. And right now, nationally, they have Joe Biden up by 50 to 36 in the battleground states. He has an 11-point lead in Michigan and Wisconsin, a 10-point lead in Pennsylvania, a 6-point lead in Florida, a 7-point lead in Arizona, and a 9-point lead in North Carolina. Alyssa, do these numbers make your stomach hurt a little bit?
No. I mean, here's the problem. You know that Trump thrives as an underdog and as a victim. So I just think this totally helps him. I mean, look, empirically, is it bad? Sure. And poll numbers like this aren't great, but I do think that he really thrives when he can go to everyone on his campaign stops where he's having rallies without masks and being a super spreader. He can be like, see, they're trying to fucking take it away from us again. I think that his narrative, he is someone who does well with this narrative. So we definitely can't be complacent.
Dan, what do you think? My reaction to this was, perhaps letting a plague loose on your people and then tear gassing them just isn't popular. Maybe it's just not popular. I'm no pollster. I'm not an expert, but gut sense, not popular.
I woke up at 5:30 this morning, and somehow you and Ben Rhodes, who live like I do on the West Coast, had already been texting about this for 20 minutes, including
I was
some
up at
texts.
4:30 today. I can't sleep anymore. I don't know what's wrong with me.
It's practice.
I'm sleep training myself for the time.
Yes. And you were saying some things that I thought were insane, like just for karma reasons alone. And I went looking at 5:30 because I feel like it's my job in life to take whatever optimism, hopes, and dreams you have and to find some recent history or data reason to crush them. So I opened up the New York Times app and I read this poll, and I could find none. they're like,
which should make us even more nervous.
It's like, don't get me wrong. I am like, I can conjure up 700 ways in which this goes bad very quickly. But in this exact poll, in this moment, there is no good news for Trump. There is none. It is like, even at first I was like, I found something. 56% of people approve of Trump on the economy. That seems good. But if you're only getting 36% of the electorate, that's bad. that means they took the one thing they like about you and they do not care, right? And Trump is in a very, very, it is a very challenging and historically terrible place for an incumbent to be. Now, the caveats I would put here before anyone gets super excited is, one, Trump is going to try to steal this election, right? Through both legal, quasi-legal, and illegal means. So we should be ready for that. Two, when thinking of the national polls, we just have to remember that because we have an incredibly ass-backwards system of government in America, we spot Trump 4 to 5 points. So a poll where he is winning by 10 nationally means he's 4 to 6 points, or 5 to 6 points away from being tied, right? And so small. And then even when you look at some of the numbers in here, this is going to inevitably narrow. Now, absent, some changes, some pretty significant changes in how some percentage of the people feel about Trump, that narrowing is not enough to get him across the finish line. But this is going to get closer. And Trump only has to get it within field goal range for the combination of the pandemic, voter suppression, and maybe Bill Barr to turn this from a Biden win into a Trump reelection.
Yeah, I tried to do the pessimistic path to freaking out. And that path is the media wants a race. The media is going to be tired of this narrative very soon. There will be natural tightening in these polls because at least maybe not. We don't know. But these are very big leads, especially in the battlegrounds, right? I mean, you were talking national 10, like we're seeing 11-point leads in battleground states. That's crazy. So as these narrow, it'll start looking like the race is tighter. The press will take that as evidence that Joe Biden is fucking something up. There'll be a narrative that he's fucking up. Fucking up begets more fucking up. And then we also have so they could try to frame his VP choice as a mistake. They could try to frame the convention as a dud. And now it's getting closer. He's got 3 debates to get through, right? And also we should remember that, in the last 4 months, we had a pandemic, a once-in-a-generation recession, and sort of and protests about racial injustice that we haven't seen since the late 60s in just the last 4 months. So who knows what the next 4 months is going to bring. But right now, it is it's bad. I mean, I think the number in there that says more than anything else is 55% of registered voters in the battleground states say there is almost no chance they would support Donald Trump. 55%. Alyssa's like, I don't want to believe it.
I mean, it's so hard to I mean, I believe their methodology is good, but it's June, it's June. And it's almost like, it's like he gets such a pass from everyone for being such a fucking malevolent moron that you want to go to the battlegrounds with these people who still support him and be like, if you acted at your job the way he does at his, would you still have a job? The answer would be no. And so but that's been true for years now. So I don't know. Yeah. I'm glad that it's better the numbers say that than the opposite, but it's only June.
I mean, just to give some perspective of June, the distance between the Iowa caucus, in which Joe Biden came in fourth, and today is the same distance in time between today and the election.
I know. It's so funny. Tommy just said that. Tommy just said that.
Very fast math.
Yeah. I got that from Tommy.
Oh, okay. Attribution.
Just to nerd out for a second, I want to just dig into some of the numbers on who is driving this lead for Biden and what is driving the lead for Biden. On the who, and we talked about this a lot on the wilderness, so Biden's winning by 17 points among people who didn't vote in 2016. So the new people who have come into the electorate since 16, which is sort of whether you've sort of marched or whether you've registered to vote for the first time, whether you hadn't paid attention, those people are in Biden's camp by 17 points. But check out the shifts in this poll among people who voted in 2016 because they asked them who they voted for. Trump beat Clinton by 2 points among people in these battlegrounds who voted in 2016. Biden's winning now by 5, mainly because a bunch of younger, college-educated white voters have changed their mind. They went from Trump to Biden. And there's also a good number of older white voters without a college degree who've changed their mind as well, which is even wilder. And it looks like his margins among Black and Latino voters are basically unchanged. Dan, were there any surprises there for you?
I mean, the fact that Joe Biden is basically winning with white voters or tied with white voters is just a dramatic change. There was this sort of existential question that it hung over this election where, we, as we've talked about before, one of the reasons why everyone, ourselves included, got 2016 so wrong is that we made this assumption that the nadir for the party with white non-college voters would be Obama in 2012. And the assumption at least the beginning of the 2016 race is that she would outperform Obama by at least a couple, if not more than that, which would give her, the ability to turn some states like North Carolina that we could not win. And would certainly make up for, whatever drop in African-American turnout was expected without Obama on the ticket. And there was this fear that the bottom was going to keep falling out among those voters. But that has not happened. And Joe Biden has both reconstituted elements of the Obama coalition and added onto it the voters who have moved in the post-Trump realignment, after 2016. I think that is what goes for a lead that is that large, right? Is that he is sort of he's brought in those, like when you talk about the people who did not vote in 2016, that's not just new voters, that's also some portion of the 4 million Obama 2012 voters who did not vote in that election. So those people have come back into the process and they're supporting Joe Biden, right? On top of the people who have moved to Democrats either in the suburbs or elsewhere.
Alyssa, I also think I found why Trump's economic advantage is not translating into better poll numbers. 55% of battleground state voters say the government's priority should be to limit the spread of coronavirus, even if it hurts the economy, while just 35% say the government's priority should be to restart the economy. And that includes people who've been unemployed because of this crisis.
And also, this is right now, he has his lowest approval rating for handling the coronavirus.
Yeah.
So, I think that at some point people are like, okay, so my friends have died. There are a few people who have not been impacted in some way, shape, or form. And so I think that, this is still the beginning of this pandemic. So that is something that does give me some hope, because I don't think he's going to turn this pandemic ship around in time to change people's opinions on that.
Yeah. The other findings that I thought were very interesting had to do with the protests and the Black Lives Matter movement. 63% of battleground voters say they'd rather back a presidential candidate who focuses on the cause of the protests, even when the protests go too far, while just 31% say they'd prefer to support a candidate who says we need to be tough on demonstrations that go too far. And I find that interesting because there's this other finding where voters over 50 without a college degree in the battleground states still oppose the demonstrations, say that too many have turned to violent rioting, are split on whether discrimination against whites is as big a problem as discrimination against minorities. So the same cohort that you would imagine had these views in 2016 are still there having these views in 2020, but they're no longer enough to give Trump an advantage in these battleground states, primarily because younger white voters have views that are rapidly shifting on this, partly because of the protests and Black Lives Matter and everything we've seen, not just over the last several weeks, but probably over the last several years.
When you look at those numbers that you just laid out, what is pretty clear is that Trump has massively misplayed his hand at every juncture over the last few months. When there were, at any point where there is a choice between two approaches, he has chosen the wrong one, right? Where it is side with the protesters or side with the police, Trump chose the police, the public chose the protesters. It was side with keeping us safe from coronavirus or opening up the economy. Trump picked opening up the economy or those protesters, right? Like this, I guess maybe that's the perfect example is we've had two very prominent groups of protesters. We had millions of people who were in the streets protesting systemic racism after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others. And then you had a small, tiny group of protesters, mostly carrying AR-15s, arguing for opening the economy in the middle of a pandemic. Trump picked that small group, not the big group. And that's
Back the wrong horse, buddy.
And I think that one of the reasons why that happened, other than the fact that Trump has a long history of just being stupid, is that
and racist.
Racist, right? Like reflexive racism and inherent stupidity are his problems.
Yeah.
Yes. But he is running to be the president of Fox News America, right? He doesn't understand that what he sees on Fox News is not what's happening in the country, right? He, when he watches Fox, I think he thinks he's looking out a window, but he's really looking in a mirror. And that has warped how he's approached all of these things. And it was such a layup to do this. The public was yearning at the beginning of this pandemic for Trump to do the right thing, right? That's why they rallied to him and his approval and so on up at the beginning. If he had just worn a mask, gone and met with and worked with Cuomo and Newsom and Whitmer and tried to do the bare minimum of the job, the press and the public would have given him a ton of credit. Instead, he decided to do the exact opposite. And, Nate Cohn talks about it in that poll, and they're right up at the poll, is one of the places where he's hurting the most is Michigan, which is not unrelated. It's where his pandemic numbers are the worst among the battleground states, which is not unrelated to the fact that he declared he did not want to give Michigan equipment and tests because Governor Whitmer was mean to him. That probably hurt him.
That he better hope. Trump better hope statues can vote.
That's it. He's going to be down to just Confederate statues.
That's it. Those are going to be his
Alyssa-
precinct captains.
Alyssa, if you're on the Biden campaign, you're running the Biden campaign, what do you do over the next few months to press this advantage that he has in the polls right now to make sure that we're not sitting here in October and they're like, what the fuck happened? Now he's losing.
Well, I mean, they shouldn't believe the polls too much. That's that's step number one. And I think he just kind of has to keep doing what he's doing, being positive, showing connection to people. I mean, it's like when you see these ads every morning you wake up and there's a new ad on Twitter that you can watch 10 times and cry. And let's be clear, I'm very critical of ads because, I always think I could do better. But these are always, they are, and I think that they are so emotional because we have fallen so far that, you're like, oh my God. But I would, in as much as he can connect, keep doing small things to connect with people. As things open up, I don't know if they will do events or not, but I just think let's just not do anything crazy, basically.
Just, stay healthy, man.
Just
stay healthy.
Stay the course.
Dan, what do you think? Anything you do?
I think he has an advantage right now and he should press it. And ultimately, Trump is going to decide that the only way he can win is to completely destroy Joe Biden. Now, that strategy may not work, but that is coming. And so take advantage of Trump's distraction right now to define yourself in the minds of voters. Because negative partisan, this race is right now a referendum. And maybe it will stay a referendum till the end. But these things tend to default into being something more like a choice. And if Biden now has the resources and the ability and the time and the credibility to shape how that choice plays itself out if it manifests itself at the end. And so I would be doing that by being out there, by, certainly running ads and really sort of using, this is a huge opportunity to tell his story, both his personal story and his life and his governing experience story, there's some really good ads out from Unite the Country, the pro-Joe Biden super PAC that connects what's happening now to the way he helped manage the stimulus with Obama in 2009, 2010. And I think that is a good first step, right? Maybe you never need it, but because Trump can't get out of his own way, but you have the time now to do the work to prepare for the worst case scenario.
So last question I want to ask you both is about how the current state of the race might affect Biden's VP selection, which also gives us an opportunity to talk about your new Pod Save America miniseries about the VP selection process. That's the ticket. You want to give everyone a little preview? Alyssa, give us a little preview.
So this is just Pfeiffer and I. We are both going down memory lane for all of the things that we have seen, but then also I think that Biden has said that he is going to choose a woman, and so we have a lot of examples of both women. Geraldine Ferraro, first woman to be picked on the ticket. Other women who have been in public office: Hillary Clinton, Shirley Chisholm, who was the first woman to run for president. How were they treated? What are the important things that he's going to be looking for? What is the vetting process like? How do you roll this out? How do you roll this out in a Zoom world? And who is he looking at, and what sort of characteristics are potentially the most important to getting him across the finish line and keeping those polls where they are?
Yes. Go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, the vice presidential selection process is the most discussed and perhaps least understood part of presidential politics. The reporters covering it, the people obsessing about it on Twitter, don't fully understand how that process takes place. I often describe Alyssa as the foremost living expert on how that process takes place because she worked for John Kerry when he was on the short list in 2000 and was involved with his part of that process.
That.
Mm-hmm.
She helped lead that process for John Kerry in 2004 when he selected John Edwards, which we will not hold against her. And then helped spearhead that process for Barack Obama in 2008 when we picked Joe Biden, for which we will give her full credit. And what we want to do is not say who Joe Biden is going to pick or even who he should pick, but is to help people understand how that process is playing itself out. What are they looking at? What is happening behind the scenes? And as Alyssa said, talk about how the pandemic has changed how that process works, right? Where you're potentially making a decision over Zoom or rolling someone out over Zoom. And Alyssa has a gazillion great stories about all of the subterfuge and secrecy that goes into trying to keep this decision a surprise. And the first episode comes out tomorrow, Friday, June 26th. And it was super fun to hang with Alyssa as always. But she has some amazing stories about how John Kerry and Barack Obama went about making their selections in secret. That includes everything from how the vetting process works, how you sneak people into meetings, to how you warn John Kerry about some flatulent potential contenders.
I'm so excited for this. And by the way, you can hear it right here on the Pod Save America feed. It's going to be right on this feed, so just check it out tomorrow. One theory of the case on what the Biden campaign is thinking right now in terms of EP might be, okay, now we have this big lead that we, maybe internally they have the same numbers that the New York Times has. We have this big lead. Maybe we just need to not fuck things up, not take risks, be super cautious in our pick, make sure we don't make any waves with it. Do you think they might be, you guys have any thoughts on whether they might be thinking that or whether that's a good idea?
I hope they don't overthink it. I mean, I think the most important thing is that whoever he picks, people can see a true chemistry with, like that they are going to be a real team. And so, if you sit there and really overthink it, like that's one thing I think that was interesting about the John Kerry selection versus the Barack Obama selection. There were so many more people involved in the internal chit chat about who, what, when, where. Whereas I think Barack Obama just literally decided this is who my partner is. Right. And so, and I think that that's very successful. And so I think that he just needs to pick the person that he feels is going to be his partner. And that he doesn't listen to like 17 consultants tell him who's going to do better in fucking North Carolina, because that's all bullshit and we know it.
That's good advice, Alyssa.
Thank you. I've done this before.
Don't listen to the 17 consultants. Listen to Alyssa. Dan, do you have any parting thoughts?
I think they should definitely play it safe. No one has ever lost a game by playing prevent defense. It has a 100% record of success. Just ask Super Bowl champions, the Atlanta Falcons, and others. Look, in all seriousness, I think Joe Biden is going to put tremendous weight on who he wants to work with, right? And who he thinks will be the right partner for him. Like, we know from working with him, we know from what he said that his partnership with Barack Obama was so important to how that presidency worked, right? So he's going to want to try to get the same thing. And that is the thing that that is a decision only he can make. That is going to be based on his experience with the person, right? And how stable their Zoom connection is when they meet. But
can they use Zoom?
Right. So I think that's going to be the driving factor. The thing I hope that plays into that, right, if you're sort of like choosing between two people you have equally good chemistry with, is that he is going to pick the person who is going to be the leader of the party after Joe Biden, whether that's in 4 years or in 8 years. And I hope that there is a thought of that is part of the process, that he really is building the bridge to the future. Like, who that person is, I do not know the answer to, but I think one of the things we learned in the Obama administration is the president blots out a lot of the sun for other parts of the party, and so you need to elevate someone who is the potential future leader of the party. So I hope that's part of the calculus.
All right, thanks, Alyssa, for riding along as our co-host today. This was fun.
I'm really glad I made the cut, guys.
Look, I got to do 2 podcasts with Alyssa this week, so it's a huge.
You guys are never going to get rid of me. I have nothing to do but podcast with you and make jam, which Hysteria listeners know. So call me up anytime.
All right, jam and podcast. Let's do it. Bye, guys. Check out Pod Save the World this week. The team worked very hard to make sure no one has to actually purchase John Bolton's book to learn what he had to say about Trump. You just have to listen to Tommy and Ben. They also talk about the climate crisis, escalating violence in Afghanistan, Chinese cyber attacks, and Tommy interviewed Hamed Sanu, the lead singer of one of the biggest bands in the Middle East and an influential LGBTQ rights activist.